At exactly 8:17 on a cold Monday morning in Chicago, something happened inside the 28-story Hawthorne Tower that nobody had seen in 9 years. A billionaire known throughout the city for his cold expression suddenly stopped walking in the middle of the lobby, stared at his phone, and began to laugh. Not a polite smile, not a nervous chuckle, a real, uncontrollable laugh that echoed through the marble walls. His security guards froze. His assistant stared in disbelief. Even the receptionist dropped the papers in her hands, because everyone who knew Adrian Whitmore knew one thing. Adrian Whitmore had not truly laughed since the day his wife died 9 years earlier. And nobody could have imagined that the woman who would finally break through his silence would be the maid everyone in his company barely noticed. If you believe kindness can heal wounds that money never can, and that everyone deserves a second chance, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel, because sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change a life forever. Adrian Whitmore was 48 years old and owned one of the largest real estate investment companies in Chicago. His penthouse overlooked the city from the top floors of Hawthorne Tower. His cars were worth more than most houses, and his name appeared regularly in business magazines. From the outside, he had everything a person could possibly want. But inside his enormous apartment, there was a silence that money could never buy its way out of. 9 years earlier, Adrian had lost his wife, Rebecca, in a highway accident during a violent winter storm. She had been driving home after leaving a charity event they'd attended together. Adrian had wanted her to stay the night, but she'd insisted she needed to check on her younger sister. Those were the last words they ever shared. Since that night, Adrian had slowly withdrawn from everyone around him. He stopped attending parties. He stopped celebrating birthdays. He stopped visiting the restaurants they used to love. Most painfully, he stopped laughing. People around him learned not to joke in his presence. His employees lowered their voices when he entered a room. His assistants became experts at reading his expressions. His security team knew the safest way to deal with him was to say nothing unless necessary. Adrian wasn't cruel, but grief had made him distant. He carried his pain like an invisible suit of armor. Then came Clara Bennett. Clara was 36, a widow herself, and had moved to Chicago from a small town in Indiana after losing her husband to illness. She had a 12-year-old son named Noah, and every dollar she earned went toward keeping a roof over their heads and giving him a shot at a better life. She'd taken the housekeeping position at Adrian's penthouse because it paid better than most cleaning jobs, but from the first day, she understood this was not an ordinary home. There were no family photographs displayed in the living room except one framed picture of Rebecca. No birthday decorations, no holiday ornaments, no signs anyone actually lived there. The kitchen was equipped like a 5-star restaurant, yet Adrian rarely ate anything except simple meals. The dining table could seat 12 people, but he always sat at one end alone. Clara never asked him about Rebecca. She understood that grief wasn't a door you forced open. Instead, she quietly began taking care of the things nobody noticed. She placed fresh flowers beside Rebecca's photograph every Friday. She made sure Adrian's favorite coffee was ready before sunrise. When winter came, she warmed his coat near the radiator before he left for work. She never demanded gratitude. She simply believed that caring for someone meant doing what needed to be done, even when nobody was watching. One afternoon, Clara noticed something unusual while cleaning Adrian's study. A small wooden music box sat inside a drawer beneath several old documents. When she accidentally opened it, a soft melody filled the room. Clara immediately recognized the tune because her own husband used to hum it while cooking dinner. She closed the box and put it back exactly where she'd found it. But that evening, she noticed Adrian standing in the doorway of the study, staring at the drawer. For the first time, Clara understood the music box wasn't just an object. It was a memory. Weeks passed and winter became harsher. One evening, Noah came to the penthouse because Clara had no one available to watch him after school. He sat quietly in the kitchen doing his homework, While his mother worked, Adrian returned unexpectedly and saw the boy sitting at the counter, surrounded by math books. He said nothing. He simply walked into his office. But later that night, Clara discovered a brand new laptop sitting beside Noah's backpack. No note, no explanation. She immediately knew who'd left it there. She thanked Adrian the next morning, but he simply waved it off, telling her through a brief gesture that it was nothing. Clara knew better. It wasn't nothing. It was a lonely man's way of caring without knowing how to say it. Then one Friday, Adrian's company hosted an enormous charity gala. Hundreds of wealthy guests filled the ballroom. Cameras flashed, champagne glasses sparkled, and people laughed loudly around Adrian. Yet he stood near the window, looking completely detached from the celebration. Clara had been asked to help with preparations and was carrying trays through the service corridor when she overheard two employees discussing Adrian. They wondered whether he would ever be happy again. One of them quietly suggested that maybe some people simply stopped feeling after enough pain. Clara heard those words and looked toward Adrian through the open ballroom doors. She didn't believe that. That night, something unexpected happened. As the guests prepared to leave, Clara noticed that Adrian had disappeared. She found him alone in a small side room where Rebecca's old charity photographs had been set up for the evening. He stood before one particular picture, his face completely still. Clara didn't interrupt him. Instead, she walked to a nearby table and picked up a small dessert left over from the event. A ridiculous-looking chocolate cake decorated with bright strawberries. She carried it toward him, set it on the table, and then did something nobody in that building would ever have expected. She took a tiny strawberry, balanced it on her nose, and stood perfectly still. Adrian stared at her. Clara didn't smile. She simply stood there with the strawberry balanced on her nose, looking completely serious. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Adrian's lips moved. A tiny smile appeared. Clara kept going. She tried balancing another strawberry on top of the first. It fell immediately. She tried again. It fell again. On the third attempt, she accidentally knocked the entire plate onto the floor. She looked at the mess. Then she looked at Adrian, and something inside him broke open. Adrian laughed. At first it was one quiet breath, then another. Then suddenly he was laughing so hard he had to sit down. Clara began laughing too, not because the joke was particularly funny, but because after 9 years of silence, hearing Adrian laugh felt almost like watching spring arrive after a lifetime of winter. But then Adrian's laughter faded, his eyes filled with tears. He looked at the photograph of Rebecca and finally let himself cry. Clara didn't try to stop him. She didn't tell him to be strong. She didn't say everything would be okay. She simply sat beside him in silence. For the first time in 9 years, Adrian wasn't hiding his grief. And that was the real thing Clara had done. She hadn't simply made a millionaire laugh. She had reminded him that laughing didn't mean he'd forgotten Rebecca. It meant he was still alive. The following weeks changed Adrian in ways nobody expected. He began eating meals at the dining table instead of alone in his office. He started visiting Rebecca's favorite charity. He even returned to a small restaurant they'd once loved. Most importantly, he began speaking about his wife without immediately shutting down. He also changed the lives of the people around him. He created a scholarship in Rebecca's name for children who had lost a parent. He raised wages for his household staff. He quietly paid the medical bills of one of his longtime employees. He even helped Clara secure a small apartment closer to Noah's school. But when Clara thanked him, Adrian made sure she understood she'd given him something far more valuable than anything money could buy. She had given him permission to live again. Months later, on Rebecca's birthday, Adrian invited a small group of friends and employees to the cemetery. There were flowers, photographs, and handwritten memories. Clara stood quietly near the back with Noah. Adrian placed a bouquet beside Rebecca's grave and stayed silent for a long moment. Then, for the first time, he smiled. Not because he'd forgotten his pain, but because he'd finally learned that love could survive alongside it. As everyone began walking away, Noah whispered something that made Clara laugh. Adrian heard it and turned around. A second later, he started laughing too. The millionaire who hadn't laughed in 9 years was laughing beneath the autumn sky, surrounded by people who had slowly become his family. And Clara realized something that day. Sometimes the person who changes your life isn't the one with the most money, the greatest power, or the loudest voice. Sometimes it's the person who sees your broken heart and simply refuses to believe it will stay broken forever. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs a little hope, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about kindness, second chances, and unexpected miracles. And before you leave, comment "Kindness can heal" if you believe one small act of kindness can change someone's entire life. Because Adrian had spent 9 years believing his laughter had died with the woman he loved, until one maid, one strawberry, and one completely ridiculous moment reminded him of something he had forgotten. Healing doesn't mean forgetting the people we lost. Sometimes healing means learning that it's okay to smile because of them again.